So there's ways to grow geometry in very complex and interesting ways, but for something like this that doesn't really take all that long, I think that it would be better to do something a little bit more simple. It's not super simple, but I think it'll fit what we need without having to build arrays, create some sort of growing algorithm. We're just going to do something with geometry. So first of all, we're going to go, so that point that I created here that I'm using to transfer color onto this surface, we can reuse that point, and we are going to do copy to points, and then we're going to make a sphere. And so we can just copy a sphere onto this spot, and right now it's definitely too big, but that's fine because I can just change the scale. First it's going to start at 0, and we're going to have to animate this sphere. So I think we'll first start to have it grow around frame 32, and now we'll do 34. And then I'm going to make the scale, well, let's look at it first. We're going to make it polygon. We're going to need a lot of points because this is going to be growing out, so let's just make it 40. And we'll make it 50 just for fun. Alright, so we're going to bring this to 0. And then let's say we grow it out. Let's see. We want to kind of ease it. So we're going to do something like make this 0.25 here. Uh-oh. Hold on. We want this 0 here, and then we want to go to, let's say, frame 51. Then we'll make this 0.25 here. So ease it in. And then we're going to go to frame 1070. Yeah, we'll do 1072. And here we'll make this 65. And then we're going to need it to grow even more. So let's say around frame 90. We'll just make it 1.4. Make sure that it covers the entirety of these ice crystals. So we can just look here. And then make sure that as this grows... Oh, forgot to actually change or make a key here. So back to... We'll do 90. Make this 1.4. And now we can look and see, this probably doesn't need to grow. We'll just make this 1. Whoop. We'll go to 90 and make this 1. It's going to need a bit more, 1.1. We'll make it 1.2 because we're still going to need to noise this up. But we can see here that this will grow and expand out, but we need to do more to it than just grow a sphere. And one of the first things that I like to do is, if we deal with this, I guess if we start it at 0, hold on, I will show you what I mean. I'm going to hide this. Points still exist here, they're just at 0. And that means that later when we're going to be transferring color from this object, we are going to have these points exist throughout the entirety of it, transferring color when we don't want it to be there at all. So a really simple way of making sure that you don't have any geo when you have something at 0 scale. I guess if you don't want points, and since all the points still exist, like if we look at the geometry spreadsheet, oh, I just realized that I got out of my viewport or my desktop setup. So if we go here, we can see that even though things are at a scale of 0, we still have a lot of points. So we'll go back, we'll view our points, and then we can do a measure. And so now what this does is if we go into our primitive attributes, we can see it has an area. And with that, what I'm just going to do is I'm going to promote this attribute to points. Oh, I have to also say which attribute I'm using. Area. So now area is over here. And a really easy thing to do now is I can just say, whoop, I can create a point wrangle. And just do if area equals, and then I'll just make sure that I have an attribute here that I can alter in case I want to say that it gets deleted until it reaches a certain size. I'll have a slider that will let me do that, so I can do remove point 0 ptnum. So you can see that this defaults to 0, and right now I'm just going to keep it at 0. But you can see that now that it looks and sees that area is 0, and because it's 0, it's just going to remove all those points. But then as it starts to actually grow, whoop, there it is. So we have those points. So none of these points are going to be sitting around in the beginning transferring color. And so this is very useful for a lot of different things, not just what we're doing here. If you have things that you've scaled to 0 and don't want them to exist until they actually grow, this is a really quick and simple way to do it. And then we want to noise this, so I'm just going to go back up to the noise that I had stuck up there. Let's grow this out. So we need more noise. Let's say I want a frequency, 3.3 is probably fine. And then amplitude we're going to crank up a bit. So let's make it 0.5. So we can see here, right now the noise is swimming. And that's fine. I want this to undulate as it grows out, because then that's going to give a weird edge as this passes through our geo. So if we just view this here, we can watch as it cuts through. And so what we need to do now is we're going to take this geo and we're going to pass it. First I'm going to scatter some points onto this. I could fill this with points, but we just need the edge right now, so I just want a lot of points around the edge. I think right now we'll just make this like 120,000 points so that when it grows out, there's not a huge gap between them, and I think that's going to work fine. And so we can do a solver sop, because as this grows, we want this to transfer color onto the points that we have here. I'm going to take these scattered points and put them in the second input. We want to store the color information per frame as this grows out. And in order to do that, I can just go in here. And so this is the second input. And I can make an attrib transfer in here. One of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that it's transferring color. I also need to make sure that this is white, so I'm going to make a color here. Now these points are white. I'm going to go in here. I've made sure that these are black. I need to change the distance threshold, because if I leave it at 10, then it's just going to immediately turn everything white. It's going to have too high of a radius to look at, so I'm going to make this 0.025. I'm going to increase the kernel radius and change the max sample count to 5. I don't know entirely how necessary this is, but sometimes in solver sops you get stepping unless you create a higher kernel radius and sample count. It depends on how fast it's moving, and also another thing that we'll probably have to do is change the substeps of this solver. I'm going to make that 2, just to make sure that as this grows out we don't get any strange stepping. Now I can just go back here and I'm gonna play and see what happens. Right now it's gonna take a little bit. Okay, so we can scrub back a little bit here and see that this is now growing up along these crystals, and this will give us a nice growth pattern without having to deal with space colonization, arrays, lots of point wrangles. It's a very simple way to get things to grow out. Again, there's much more complicated and in-depth ways of getting this to work, but I think this is simple enough and effective enough that it will do just fine for what we need. Now that we have the color transferred on to these crystals, we're going to want to cache this out because the solver SOP does take a little bit of time and we don't want to have to keep having it cook, so we're just going to make a file cache. And we're going to call this solver transfer. And we need it to go from, we'll just start at 1001, and then this just needs to go to 1100. We cook it up to about 1090, but might as well just make it an even 1100, because why not? Again, I need to go up and remove hip name. Make sure that looks good, so we're gonna do load from disk, make sure load from file is no geometry, and then I'm gonna hit save. It's finished caching. So now if we drag this, we can see, whoop, all right, that's going, and that's cool. One of the things that we're gonna need to do though is that if we go past frame 1100, it just disappears. We do want it to exist after that, so we'll have to do a time shift. And then we can just clamp to last here and then just say 1100. So now if we go here, it'll still grow like we want, but then I can drag to my heart's content down the timeline and it will still exist. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create a blast. And we're going to do at cd.x is greater, or we'll say less than 0. And then we gotta tell it that it is looking at points. Oh. I have it as less than 0. I want it to be less than 1. I am foolish. Okay, so now if we grow this out, we can see this is our ice growing. And that's exactly what I want. Now we need to combine the ice with the water that we have. So the water, we're going to look over here, make sure that, yep, this has the color black. So we're going to combine by just doing, first we're going to do an attrib transfer. And then we're going to combine these two. It's going to take a second to think about it. And then I have this all kind of spread out. I want to consolidate it a little bit now that we know exactly how our graph tree is going to be. We might need to branch it out later, but right now this is just going to be easier to look at. So now that we have the attrib transfer, again, this is just way too much, or way too wide of a radius. So in the beginning we're going to make it so distance threshold, we'll start it at 0.025, and then what we can do is we're going to key it, and we're going to start our key at 1035. So I'm going to go into manual real quick. I'm going to go to 1035, key that, and then we're going to say around 1090 we're going to make the value, make it 0.6. We'll see if that covers everything. I'm going to get out of manual. And yes, it does cover everything. Then, this is just for transferring the attributes, but then we also want to merge. So we're going to merge our ice crystals with our water sim. And we're going to do this. So now we have the ice crystals are white, the water will be black, and then as the ice crystals grow, it will transfer white to the black of the water sim, turning it to ice. So if we go back to 1001, I'm going to do a quick flip book and we'll see how this looks. All right, flipbook's finished. Let's take a look at it. All right, I think that's looking good. It's pretty much exactly what we want. So now we can move on to creating two separate VDBs. And to do that, it's very simple. I don't use it all the time, but I've found that I do enjoy the split node when there's just two things that need to be split up from each other. And so we can just create the split. And I'm just going to go down to the timeline where we can just make sure that these are splitting correctly. So I can just say group, like we did before with the blast. We'll do @cd.x is less than 1. Make sure that it's points. So the black points is the water, which will be in our A. And then the white points, which are being blasted out, are in our B. I kind of want to switch that though, so we can just do invert selection. So these are both split. Now if we do a VDB from particle fluid, just gonna connect this here. I'm gonna create a convert VDB, plug that in. So let's see here. So we're going to need a particle separation that's similar to, well, the same as what we have in our particle separation for our sim up here. So I'm going to go into manual mode. Look at here, our particle separation is 0.006. I'm going to copy this parameter. In case we ever want to resim it for whatever reason, we don't have to go in and then change the values of our particle fluid. So particle separation, paste relative reference, 0.006. Voxel scale, I'm going to make 0.5. Droplet scale, I'm going to make 0.25. And then let's just take a look and see what happens. I'm going to go to auto update. Okay, so this is our ice. And convert VDB, I need to make polygons. Let's just see here. It's kind of difficult to see what's happening with all these points. I think we might need to change a little bit just so that we don't get these jagged bits here. So let's change voxel scale to 0.75. And that made it worse, so let's make this 0.4. And then droplet scale, we'll just make it 0.5. Yeah, so that looks less jagged. I think that'll work. So yeah, they're sort of connecting in with each other and forming a nice crystalline structure. And then if we just, I'm going to go into manual mode, go into copy, going to paste, going to put that in where the water is. And it will do the exact same thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a couple file caches. We'll just call this ice cache. Get rid of hip name. Load from file, no geometry, load from disk. And then we need the range of this to just be 1100. We're going to copy and we're going to paste. And this one's going to be water cache. And everything's good here. So I'm going to write these out, and then we're going to move on to creating the mist that will be growing with the ice.